what your experience is, but I've been into an awful lot of very stimulating, terrific papers today. And certainly today's conference represents what the goals and ideals that BARI, has aspired to for such a long time. So thank you all for coming. We're going to have our keynote, and as Tim Ridden was talking about this morning, the purpose of today is not just to talk about a lot of really neat research, but really worry about how that research can inform public policy, result in better public policy decisions being made. And so that's the focus of the last keynote. Now, the situation is a little unusual here in that we have a moderator sufficiently important that he has to be introduced, which has not happened at all today. So, Bob, you should feel very privileged. You can go anonymous. Well, in fact, that's going to be my lead-in, because I spent a lot of time last night on the web trying to figure out interesting things to say about you. So I discovered several Bob Oakses. There are a number of obituaries for Bob Oakes, but he's here, so I think that's not right. There's a Bob Oakes who's a thoracic surgeon in Nebraska, and then there's a Bob Oakes who's a photographer. The best thing I found out of this Bob Oakes is there's a hilarious video of his being in an East Coast restaurant in some kind of contest where the contestants are being asked to eat the most spicy food possible. And Bob goes on and on, eloquently describing what's going on in his mouth, his throat, his eyes, and so on. So I highly recommend that. But it turned out really, the only thing that's on there, and he must be a very modest person, because everybody who introduces him seems to use the same thing, same basic piece. And so I'll just read it to you, but thanks for coming. Bob Oakes has been WBUR's Morning Edition anchor since 1992. Many of us have certainly listened to you over the years. He's one of the most well-known and respected newspaper people in New England, with a 35 career in radio broadcasting, including 10 years in Boston's all-news commercial radio station WEEI, and provides coverage of national issues for CBS Radio Network. So thank you very much for doing this, Bob, and then you get to introduce all these people.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. I'm so glad to the groups for inviting me. I very much appreciate it. I'm glad that you all gave up this nice, warm, dry, sunny, 80-degree day to be here. But why don't we jump right into the topic, if we might? Because I have a lot of things with the panel that I'd like to get through. I'd like to push a little bit. I sent you all an outline of some of the things that I'd like to talk about so you could prepare some things, but frankly, I didn't put everything I wanted to talk about in there because I wanted to have a few questions that maybe surprised you a little bit. So no one seems to worried about that. So why don't we just jump right in if we can. In the report co-authored by David Ellwood, titled Restoring the American Dream, what would it take to dramatically increase mobility from poverty by the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, which many of you have probably read earlier if you haven't seen it today. I found what I thought was the most troubling statement I read in prepping for this panel, and it said this, quote, America may be reaching a turning point, a time when we either restore the shared dream of prosperity and common cause, or we slide into social, economic, and political division or dysfunction. I have to say that when I read that, it reminded me, because it's been in the news lately, of the nuclear doomsday clock, the clock that shows how close the world is to nuclear annihilation. And it made me wonder what this panel thought about how close we are to this permanent dysfunction. And David, why don't you start, if you don't mind, please.
So you think it's kind of a race? It's either nuclear war or complete social destruction. I think that, just in terms of what's going on, Raj Chetty's work's been cited a couple of times. I should just mention this report that Bob, you're kind enough to mention is something done by the U.S. that I co-authored, but I was part of as the chair of the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty. And it was a group set up by the Gates Foundation, led through work at the Urban Institute, that really was tasked with asking the question, what would it take to dramatically increase mobility from poverty? Now, I think of myself as having spent my life as a radical incrementalist, not very compelled by the idea that after the revolution everything will be fine. But to try and actually ask the question of what it would take forces you to sort of say, we're going to have to do a bunch of different things and have to think about this differently. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But to try and directly answer your question, I really think that this is I sort of feel like we're on a knife edge at this moment. There is a story to be told that we are just sliding further and further along with technology, with our cities becoming more and more where people are becoming more and more isolated from each other economically as well as in all kinds of social ways, where there's a group of people that are able to take advantage of the extraordinary changes in the society, and a whole lot of people that are being left behind is a wrong word, but that are struggling like crazy, and it's just seems like it's getting worse and worse. And it's not hard to tell a story that just reaches a point where we just almost are in different universes, and the society doesn't, then we oscillate in government, and it becomes, it's either the left or the right is winning, and all of a sudden we're in trouble. It's obviously in the current political climate been made much, much worse. But there is a story to be told that right now you see a kind of energy and activity and excitement and a recognition that this is really an important moment, that we can, in fact, take control and seize a future that has much more of a sense of hope and beyond. I would just say this, in terms of, I was asked to do this, to be a part of and put together and lead this group, which was half scholars, half practitioners, people like Raj Chetty and Kathy Eden among the scholars and on the practitioners, everything from the head of the American Enterprise Institute to the woman who leads Nurse Family Partnership and many, many others. Very heterogeneous group, lots of site visits all over the country, spent 2 years, and I am much more optimistic about the future than I was 2 years ago. I may be the only one I know, but I really am, because I honestly think there's an energy, but also I think there's a set of ideas. But I think the big challenge is not to keep strengthening each of those little ideas, it's to figure out how we connect those pieces and put them together. I think if we can do that, and we can talk more about it, I think there is real hope. But I must say, there are many people who are more convincing than I am that the hope is lower than the level of fear right now.
Well, that almost leads directly into my next question, because there just isn't almost any discussion on any program that gets any kind of government funding today that doesn't somehow lead back to the current dialogue that's prompted by the current occupant of the Oval Office. And with a 2018 campaign now underway, I wondered this: how concerned are you that the 2018 campaign is going to redirect attention away from issues that need to be addressed for this group? Because it seems pretty clear, to me anyway, that what some view as positives about the U.S. economy are going to be repeatedly touted in this election cycle. For example, how the federal tax cut is putting more money into Americans' pockets, if you believe that, and how the economy is much better today than it was, say, 16 months ago before Mr. Trump came to office. And I'm wondering, are the folks on the panel at all worried that this talk is going to mask what the real situation is facing many poor people today? Karilyn, you want to try that?
Sure. No, thanks for that. And really want to give thanks to BARI and all the folks here for this day. A lot of what I think the panel is offering and what this room presents for us is an opportunity to think about solutions and to think about what's real and what difference can we make. So the questions about inequality and mobility have got to absolutely focus themselves on the question of equity. And equity is about a corrective. And for me, any kind of correctives or solutions that we're trying to source here are based in the question of cities, city making. So I sit as a person who is sitting in the mayor's office. I sit in the Mayor's Office of Economic Development. I'm the Director of Economic Policy for the city. And the questions that we really grapple with was how do you make a city work? How do we make the city of Boston work right now, today, in a moment where the city is experiencing explosive growth? We are in what is probably one of the largest economic booms in the city's entire 400-year history. When the record books kind of clock in at us, we're probably at our third, if not fourth, or if not third largest economic boom, which is exciting. So by all measures, our outputs, our unemployment level, our rate of growth in terms of investments, the city is doing very well. But when we think about it from an equity perspective, we have some work to do. And I say it that way because when you think about cities and why people come here and what makes cities work, it's about opportunity and trying to make sure that people have access to opportunity, whether that's jobs, whether that's wealth creation, building your family, building your career. It's got to be about opportunity. And the fact that the city is growing and doing well means that we have work to do to make sure that everyone in the city is connected to that opportunity. And frankly, right now, that is not the case. So very grateful for the opportunity to kind of think about the framing that we're sitting here with, which is thinking about mobility, inequality, equity, which I would add to our conversation, and think about the ways that cities can be driving that. Because as Bob has alluded, we're all very concerned about the conversation on the national stage. And it's really concerning in terms of what that means for equity at the local level and at the city level. And we know that the country has been trending for the last, researchers will get this right here, but 40, 50 years in terms of what it means for cities to make themselves work and what that has meant in terms of a drift away from federal investments, federal support, federal policies that make cities work, and how so much of that is really landing in our laps. So again, very happy for this room, very happy for the space to kind of roll up our sleeves and think about it. I know the panelists will give us lots of insight here, but the question again is around equity and about how do you make cities work in connecting the dots. And we are very well poised to answer that question right here in the city of Boston because of the trajectory that we're on.
I want to dip into a bunch of the topics you just mentioned, but I want to start with mobility. The Restoring the American Dream report, which we mentioned a few minutes ago, concludes at one point that poverty is not just about a lack of money, it's about a lack of power. If money begets power, and power can certainly beget money, how do you interrupt that cycle to make sure that the people who need the money and need the power get their fair share? Pablo, you want to take that?
I sure would. Thank you for that question. So I'm here as a director and lead organizer for SEIU Community Action. SEIU is Service Employees International Union. And I'm here to speak about our Raise Up Massachusetts Coalition. I left some trifolds on all the tables. Feel free to take those along with you and follow us on social media, please. I think when you talk about building power in the upcoming elections and beyond, folks here in Massachusetts have decided that enough is enough. Back in 2013, a coalition came together of faith groups, of labor groups, of community groups, and decided to start organizing and growing their power in a fight for economic justice. And so you can see in your trifold there that we have an agenda that is pushing forward here in this critical election year, where we use here in Massachusetts the mechanism of ballot questions to create and wedge workers' voices into the debate. And we gather those signatures and we do the requirements to qualify our proposals on the ballot. Some of those have come as ballot questions, and we actually have one that we call the Fair Share Amendment, to take words from Bob's question. The Fair Share Amendment would be a tax on income over $1 million, where we are fighting for the common good in this Commonwealth. Investments in public transportation, investments in public education, apart from our fight to increase the minimum wage, apart from the benefit fight for paid family and medical leave. And so there are active organizations that have been around long before Donald Trump came along that are organizing to take back some of that power.
Christopher, what will it take to dramatically increase mobility out of poverty?
Bob, thanks for the easy question. I'll get right on that. Just to give a background on my perspective, I come out of this 10 years working for the Commonwealth in technology policy, advanced manufacturing, workforce development, and collaboration, moving 2 years ago to a industry position basically created specifically out of the immediately recognized need that industry has to get more involved. In the company that I joined, Jobcase, which is a company that's focused on making it just a little bit easier for people to help other people in their job searches and career building efforts. I think all industry really has to take responsibility for one basic truth, which is where are the jobs? If people are going to move, if they're going to be economically mobile, it's not going to be because folks are dropping off bags of cash here or there. No one expects that. To the very good point made earlier, the federal government has stepped way back from all sorts of traditional approaches to helping with those kinds of efforts. When you think about economic mobility and the cycle, Bob, that you just mentioned, what we're talking about is a new way to break that cycle, right? It's power with money, it's power. How do folks start changing their fundamental wealth and power dynamic? Most of us, I believe, in this room would say, you've got to have a job, a good job that pays you, and then the rest starts to flow from there. But how do you get to that? From my perspective, companies have jobs. Companies do the hiring. David Delmar, wherever he is, said one of the most important things today, which is folks got to hire. They've got to hire the people who need hiring. Now, from an industry perspective, we have to see that the folks coming in have the requisite skills, and so we start to build the kind of workforce pipelines and the debates that have been raging for decades on how do we effectively provide the kinds of ingredients to folks who want to be economically mobile that will actually provide a realistic arc towards that outcome. And I think there's been a lot of folks who say you just need two ingredients. You need people and job openings. You put them together, everything's fine. And it's really kind of a 2+5 situation, right? It's you need people, job openings, you need skills, you need access to training, you need geographic access. Transportation deserts, especially in cities, are a big, big issue. You need a freedom from discrimination in the hiring process. You need all sorts of ingredients that a lot of folks are, I think, in this room, being very helpful in becoming more specifically attuned to measuring. As we measure those more specific, higher resolution metrics, we can start managing them and we can start moving this workforce pipeline that has been failing many Americans towards a better future.
Can I answer? Take a crack at what would it take? That, after all, is what this partnership was asked to think about. And I would just say, you got to start by asking, what do we mean by mobility? And the quote about power is part of it. Part of mobility, obviously, is economic, is to have money. But part of mobility is also to have real control over your life. And part of it being a part of and admired in and valued in the community. And those three together are critical. And too often we actually focus on one or another. Well, oftentimes, like in the federal policy, yeah, we'll give you money, but then we own you. Then we own you. We can tell you what to do, where to go, what you have to do, who you have to see. And so you got to think about all three of those together. And then the question is, what would it take? And I think our answer was 5 different things, big headlines. You got to change the narrative. You got to make sure everyone has access to good jobs. You got to make sure neighborhood or you got to make sure zip code is not destiny. You've got to, when you do help folks, you got to do it as a holistic thing that's designed to empower people, not just meet some particular service need. And finally, you got to realize data is one of your best friends if you use it properly. Of course, if you use it improperly, it can be a disaster. And I would say, you got to do all five. If you just have jobs, but the neighborhoods are a disaster, it doesn't solve it. And frankly, we're not going to do anything, particularly politically, if we've got a narrative that is either about what's wrong with those people or is everybody's just a helpless victim. And so finding that narrative about what it really takes and changing all that. And I think the reality is we've got to figure a way to do all five of those things. Let me add one last quick comment on the jobs thing. I spent a lot of time, not surprisingly, on thinking about good jobs. And I agree completely with everything you just said. But I'd also like to point out, I do not believe we're ever going to have a shortage of jobs. We have very low unemployment rate right now in the country overall. There's places where it's high. What we have is a shortage of good jobs. And so the right question, and some of those jobs, by the way, are really important jobs that are not going away. I just have a brand new granddaughter, and I am not looking forward to having a robot raiser. And my mother is elderly, and I'm not looking forward for people, I do not look for robots to help her with her memory issues. And more importantly, there are so many different jobs out there, food service, other kinds of things, that another question you have to ask, how do you turn so-called bad jobs, often jobs that are critically important, into good jobs? What does that take? What does that take in terms of voicing unions? What is that, so in terms of wages, in terms of opportunities, but also how do you use technology for good for the lower skill workers, which are often, technology is great for people with lots of education. It's often worthless or poorly used for low skill workers, and so there are no job ladders. How do you take if you're a home health worker and you'd like to work in a nursing home, it turns out to be a massive gulf to get from A to B. So we have to think about ways to turn those jobs from bad jobs into good jobs. And I would say in all those different pieces. And ultimately, we have to think about ways to collaborate so that we do all five of those. No one person, no one organization, no one government can do it all. But I'm saying if you don't have good jobs, what good is a good neighborhood if you don't help people when they're struggling, et cetera?
Let me stay on the jobs thing, if I might, for a minute. And the unemployment rate for Boston in February of 2018 was 3.3%. And I don't know what the current rate is in Mattapan, Roxbury, and Dorchester, but just a few years ago, it was twice as high as what the unemployment rate was overall in the city, so I imagine it's probably still pretty much the same.
It was 3 times, yeah.
It's what?
It was 3 times.
It's 3 times. So let me ask this question. The American Dream Report says improving pathways to good jobs means there also needs to be opportunity to access education and skills training, but let me challenge that because millions have been spent on that effort over years and years. And here in the education mecca of America, what's not happening that needs to happen? And I'm not sure who wants to take that. Karilyn, you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks for that. Just sort of bringing it down to think about Boston a little bit too, and I appreciate the points made both about transportation and the need to try to get that right. And this conversation about jobs is very, it hits us right, it hits the what is it, I'm supposed to say, the nail right on the head, right? So one of the issues that we have in the city of Boston is, again, the fact that we have so much wealth. This is the argument that I would always make about Boston. We are a wealthy city in terms of outputs, in terms of jobs and opportunities, but there's a disconnect. So when I think about the fact that our overall unemployment rate, as Bob has just mentioned, is about 3%. There are definitely parts of the city where that's double and triple. So if we go to parts of East Boston or Mattapan or even Roxbury, we can have a very different story. The other challenge of living in the city of Boston is just the price of the cost of living here. So we know that in Boston, the median income is about $56,000 for a family, and it's trending, it's right on par with what we look at nationally, which is about $53,000. And so you're saying, okay, so we're doing okay. And the issue is, how much does it cost to have housing in the city of Boston? That continues to be an issue that dogs us. And so the fact that the average cost of housing is 2.5 times the national cost of housing is where you start to experience the disconnect. So you can get a job.
The average home price in Boston right now, according to Zillow, is $583,000.
Yeah, about
Go ahead.
460 or so. And so when I look at the national number, you're looking at about $177,000 as an average price home nationally. So you can see immediately from the data that tells you a story, right? We've got a problem. So how do you figure that out? How do you get access to the job or get actually transportation to the job that would allow you to purchase a home or to be in an unsubsidized housing unit. And so that's the work that remains in front of us. And we're excited, at least in the city, because yesterday the mayor released his Imagine Boston capital plan. It's a $2.4 billion plan that's really about trying to think about the investments that we need to create opportunity in each neighborhood for every Bostonian. And when we rolled out that plan, folks named 3 things. They said 3 things are essential for the city's future and our sustainability. One is this issue around education, quality education, as coming back to this point around mobility. How do you get to grow in terms of your career? How do you get to grow your family? How do you get to grow your wealth? Education is key. Another thing that folks talked about, obviously, was housing. Again, this housing issue and affordability. And the third piece that folks brought up was around transportation, actually, and the ability to actually get to a job or get to where you need to go. We have a very outmoded transportation infrastructure. That's an understatement. And so the city of Boston residents, about 14,000 people, came together and said, this is what the plan is for our future. If we don't get these things right, then we suffer the consequence of what it means to have extreme fragmentation, extreme social exclusion, and the reality that would mean not a connected body in terms of a populace, but definitely not the social cohesion we need to move us forward.
Let me come back to jobs directly here, if I might, because it plays off something that David said a minute ago, and that is this. If we're going to turn bad jobs, so-called bad jobs, into good jobs, and it's important because there's no shortage of jobs in the greater Boston area right now or all across America that simply do not provide a living wage. And I know what is said, that what needs to be done in order to convert these jobs is increasing pay, benefits, job security, and upgrade job status. But I don't understand how that's possibly achieved in the current jobs environment unless you end up with widespread support from the fast food, food services, and hotel industries where many of these jobs exist. And it just doesn't feel like we have that right now. How do we figure out how to achieve across the board support from business leaders in these sectors who are currently largely focused on their bottom lines and their shareholders? And Pablo, I'm wondering what your experience is along those lines, since a lot of those folks are employed in the sectors that you deal with through SEIU, the Service Employees International Union.
Sure. So one of our issues that I mentioned is a benefit for paid family and medical leave. This would allow families to take time away from work, collect a percentage of their income, and care for themselves during a serious illness, family member, or the welcoming of a child, whether that's through birth or adoption. The establishing of paid leave here in the Commonwealth, our proposal calls for is to establish a new fund. Establishing a new fund on a tax of 0.0065% tax on income, where every worker is contributing to grow that fund. As I talk to small businesses around this proposal,
let me interrupt you there. Do you have political support for that up on Beacon Hill?
We feel like we have support across the aisle. Absolutely. Paid leave continues to poll very, very well, and we are entering our final phase to qualify that question for the ballot. But we are open to a deal on Beacon Hill that would avoid the ballot question. I think what we're in the middle of right now is to figure out what can the legislature come up with as discussions begin with the business community as to where we can land on that. And as I talk to small business, they take a closer look at it and realize that the formula is a no-brainer. My wife is a chef. She has her owner, the restaurant owner I talked to about this. He said, I could never offer this benefit on my own. He said, but if every worker is contributing to this is a no-brainer for me. He's like, it's a no-brainer because my workers have benefits that give them security, that minimize my turnover, and minimize my need to train new staff in an industry that is notorious for turnover, right? And so for him, it's a no-brainer. He's on board. And the more conversation that I have about it, the more I think business is realizing there are some common sense things that we can do to start to address the quality of these jobs, to give people the safety nets that they need to advance and be able to conduct this economic mobility that we're talking about.
All right, Chris. I want to zero in on an inequality question, and I want to open it this way. Boston, according to figures I saw this week, Boston is 7th in the nation in terms of income inequality. The highest earning households here earn 15 times what the lowest earners make, and of course that's only an average. And most of you probably saw this in the paper recently, those startling statistics that showed in Boston the average white family has total assets valued at around $250,000 and the average black family has assets valued at $8. So this is the question. I'm wondering, is the current go-go high-tech, biotech innovation environment actually, in a way, an impediment to improving the income gap, considering that these are all highly education-dependent, high-paying jobs that are coming in?
It's certainly a barrier. It's certainly a barrier. I think that to call it one thing, to call it an exclusively a challenge or only one thing would take away the potential for those industries and what you could call the tech or the knowledge or the STEM economy's potential to be a part of the solution away. So I wouldn't want to characterize it solely in that sense. I would build on the excellent point previously that as a good kind of counterpoint, you've got absolutely astounding, like world-leading economic success in Boston in tech. You have the benefits of that going to an incomplete, to put it mildly, set of folks in the region. That then fuels things like housing prices to skyrocket, which hits everybody, right? And so we've started to see these income inequalities, but broader than that, all across society. The economic success flowing in then creates a destabilizing effect for folks who are not able to have the access to share in that. A lot of folks will say, well, let's just train a bunch of people to become data scientists and problem solved. And we know that a 6-week boot camp may be able to get somebody from a cook to a IT tech support position, but we know that that's not going to get someone to a data scientist position. We know that the access to participate in that economy is a tougher nut to crack, one that a lot of folks in this room are trying to work on. It's also the case that we can hope that people can at some point participate directly in that economy. There also have to be mechanisms for that economy to come back and refertilize the opportunity all across the region for folks who are not going to be part of that tech economy. Not everybody is going to be a coder, and that's not going to be a broad-based solution.
Okay, but that leads to this question, and a quick answer on this, if you don't mind, because I'd like it to lead into the next question. So, if Amazon locates its second headquarters here with 50, with thousands, I can't remember how many, is it 50,000, 5,000, 50,000? 50,000 jobs over 10 or 20 years that pay 60, 70, 80 grand plus, does that help or exacerbate the problem?
Yeah, I'm on it. We think this can help. The issue, again, is the point that I've made is about connectivity. So we think about growth in innovation and tech as a sector. When I looked at those numbers, I looked at those numbers really closely last year and did a year in review. I saw 30% of job growth in our region in tech and innovation. And so we have the largest global cluster of health providers and health researchers in the world is here. And so there's a lot of growth and opportunity there, but we're not figuring out how to get folks plugged in. And so if we don't figure that out, we have a problem, whether it's Amazon or anyone else. But I'll say this and then I'll wrap. is
Go.
that when companies are coming and visiting us in the city, in the mayor's office, and saying that they want to locate here, there are two things that either the CFOs or the hiring managers are asking us about over and over again. One thing they're asking about is where can people live? And they're concerned, to your point earlier, about affordability, and not just for everyone. So trying to figure out, if I relocate my talent pool here, can my folks from top to bottom find places to live in the city that are affordable? So they're asking that over and over again. And the other thing people are asking about is, how are we going to get there? You know, can we talk a little bit about transportation, and can we figure out how to make this work for us in the city? And so these are questions that come up over and over again. So folks are lured here because of the talent pool. They get excited because we have so many universities and we have all these people. But then when it actually comes down to finding the folks and hiring them and making the offers, that's where we start to get an issue.
Okay, let's talk about that, because on Tuesday of this week at 11:30 in the morning, I went to Monster.com, and Monster.com reported that there were 953 jobs posted so far on that day for Boston and within 5 miles of Boston for jobs like kitchen managers, assistant restaurant managers, all the way to chemists. And I'm sure that a lot of these were reposting, so that means a lot of these jobs are simply going unfilled. How do, you mentioned that we need to connect. How do we better connect people who want jobs, who want better jobs than they have now, or just simply want a good first job? How do we connect them to the work that is absolutely currently available as we sit here now? Chris?
I'd say three things. Three things are operating on that. Number one, there's matching. There's just straight up, someone's looking for a job, there's a job opening. Is there an access to information gap? You went to Monster. You could argue what are the best ways to sort of skin that cat. I would say that a lot of folks who are searching don't search through a platform like that. A lot of folks ask their peers. A lot of folks are only looking at the jobs that they are immediately confronted with in their own day-to-day life, which is really how all of us build our reality. So an access to information gap and a matching gap, that'll be a challenge to realizing a solution in there. That's the opportunity. I think coming from the former state employee, when we saw access to information gaps as a part of a economic inefficiency, we celebrated, because those are the things you can fix really quickly. It takes some effort, but it usually doesn't take $1 billion to do that. When you start getting into skill challenges, now we're talking real money, real effort. The city knows that. Everybody knows that there are folks, there's roughly 60,000 folks living in Roxbury right now. About 25% haven't got an educational attainment path yet past the 8th grade. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Roxbury unemployment rate officially right now is around 10%. It's about 3 times what the Boston average is. So we've got a lot of folks that when you talk about a cook, maybe they can do that, but there are folks for whom that's challenging. There's chronically unemployed people who we need to take care of, and we need to serve them better at a very low unemployment situation. That then is a benefit to us, to all the stakeholders in this room, to say, who are the folks that whenever employment goes up, they get left behind? Yeah. That set of folks are the folks we should be looking at and trying to help the chronically unemployed. The third thing I'd say is, you know, you've got matching, you've got a community and a way to bring people into this space. There are serious external factors. There is discrimination. There are other barriers that are not reflected in the stats that we're talking about. I haven't really seen great stats on transportation barriers, but I know that they're significant. We had a panel previously that had a map of what the job search function is. If you're sitting in the middle of Dudley Square and you search for a job, you might get matched to one of those potentially 900, probably about 300 because of the duplication multipliers. You could get matched with a job in Revere. Anybody in Dudley really going to take the multiple connections off the tee to get to a job in Revere and
right.
pay the money that they have to pay to do a cook job with the discount off of what you're bringing home to make that happen. So there are the structural challenges there that I think when you talked earlier, I think David made a great point about the pieces are here, but they need to be connected. I think those are the kind of challenges that when we do a little bit more incremental connecting, we can actually have a sea change in understanding those hidden challenges.
Can I also add just a couple things? First of all, I agree with everything you said. I certainly think a big part of this, I mentioned already how technology is great if you're on LinkedIn. How many low-wage workers are on LinkedIn, and why would that be of any help? So part of it is transportation, part of it is just the networks and so forth. But you know, the definition of not being able to find someone to hire to take a job is no one wants to take my job at this pay rate. Okay, that's the definition. And there are lots of employers that don't want to raise wages because it's harder to compete and so forth. But to some degree, those wages are going to have to come up. And especially, one of the things, Amazon, whatever else, what you know for sure is it's not going to reduce the number of jobs in food service if we have a whole bunch of Amazon workers. It will increase it. It's not going to reduce the number of care jobs we need. There's a whole bunch of low-paying jobs that currently, and so the question is, what do you do about that? And I think one part is SEIU and what you're doing in various ways, but the idea that you had about, let's think about some ways to take, yes, I find the public is actually quite supportive of programs that are about supporting working people. And if you think the Earned Income Tax Credit is actually a pay raise for working poor families that doesn't hurt businesses, okay? There are ways that you can use, yes, raise money through the tax system a little more, but use that money in ways that stimulates work, in ways that employers find appealing as well. So you've got to figure out how to make work pay, as well as how do you link people to those jobs. No one's going to go to Revere for a really poor paying job in food services, but they might go if it was better. And so I think the point is, it's a puzzle where you put the pieces together, but we can't let anybody off the hook on this. Part of the problem is those jobs just don't pay enough a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's a great point, David. And I think part of the challenge we're seeing is we're seeing explosive growth both at the low end of the wage spectrum in terms of jobs, and then at the top. So if you look at Department of Labor data, I'm seeing a 200 to 300% growth in professional services, executive, management level jobs. And then I'm also seeing this incredible growth in the lower end, sort of food services, some of the retail space, and so that there's growth there. The issue is the middle. When I think about some of the work, again, I referenced in technology and innovation, sort of the sector there, this question is, there are so many jobs and opportunities that are there that do not require advanced degrees or do not require even college. And then so folks have vacancies and openings, some of maybe what you even saw in your search, where folks are looking for people, but the connectivity. And so my question is always, how can we get more residents in these kinds of pipelines? So I'm happy that my colleague Midori here in the Office of Workforce Development is sort of working on these kinds of questions, but that connectivity to how do you get people in those jobs that pay well, that don't require fancy degrees like many of us have up here, but you can do well, and you can be in the middle, and you can be sustained, and you can live in the city successfully. That's kind of the missing hole in the donut here.
All right. I want one quick response from each of you to this question. This is a question about real change in terms of personal empowerment. I'm a 45-year-old woman. I live in Dorchester. I'm the single mom of 2 aged kids. I'm an immigrant in nod to Boston's rapidly growing immigrant community. I'm here legally. I speak some English, but there is still a bit of a language barrier. I work 2 roughly minimum wage jobs. While the kids are in school, I work one of them, and the other I work at night. I have a car because I'm on a bus route, and I just can't rely on city buses to get me to places that I need to go on time. And I'm continuously dumping money into this shitbox. I think I'm smart.
That's a word I don't ever remember hearing you say on the radio, so I was really...
Hashtag NBR.
Listen this side.
Listen Monday morning. I think I'm smart. I know I'm teachable. I'd love to go to learn skills at a community college so I can land a better job, but I don't know where I get the time to do that in my current situation. I don't know one of you people. I don't know one of you people to help me out. How do you find me? How do you help me? How do you empower me if you don't know who I am and you don't know where I am? And there got to be a lot of people in the city in this situation. So who wants to take this
I'm happy to
first?
jump first if
Go
that's
ahead.
useful for my colleagues to let them think more. I don't think. No, the first thing I would say is that my goal would be to, in some way, connect you, Bob, with JVS Career Solutions. And that's not a solution, that's my goal. The way to do it, as you say, is tough. My experience has been, and this is partly because of the organization in which I work and also the very real challenge of doing government-sponsored public outreach and not getting a comprehensive level of engagement, which is like par for the course. It's peers, it's peer networks. You have to have folks who are in the community, who are talking to folks at the grocery store, at church. You have to meet people where they are, and you have to work through peer networks. And so if you have community organizations like DSNI and others in communities that can get the word out about the opportunities to help folks transcend that very challenging situation, I would want somebody to be able to get to JVS and get the kinds of terrific programming that they provide. I know that on our organization's website, that's possible. People come all the time because they type in a web search and have a question, and they can find their way to a place where peers are recommending what worked for them, that peer success model. But offline in communities, and that's more often, I think, how this works, it's got to be either community reps in the neighborhood or people helping people face to face.
So my advice would be to go to Empath. Program, by the way, I have no affiliation with other than, it's a program, it's about navigators. I think the story you just said, first of all, the answer to your story is we don't know, if no one knows where you are and you're not connected, you're not going to get help. And so part of what you have to do to make that happen. But I think if you talk, the situation you just described, there's more than one problem there.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a whole bunch of different things. How can she possibly get a good education if she's got to be providing for her kids? How about she probably has housing expenses, and who knows what's going on in the broader family as well. And I think what you need is more programs that focus on her as an individual. Empath is basically a navigator model, and it's one that's based on brain science. It sort of says, look, if there's so many things that you're struggling with in life, you can't do them all. So you have to figure out where to start, and we work with you. And as a navigator, I will connect you. I know about the JVC. I know about these other programs. I will be, but you tell me what you need. You tell me what you want. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will be there to support you. And I think that function, we've got a lot of services in this city already. I think part of the function we have to do is find people, and you have to pay them well, and the navigator has to stay with you for years to really help you make those, understand those linkages and how you can take advantage of those, as opposed to getting into another program that does ABC and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't.
Carol.
I would say, I think you probably have to pay your taxes. Do you? Will you? Maybe that could be a way, because
I'm proud to pay my
Great,
taxes as
perfect.
a working person in a country that I've come to love, but that I'm frustrated with.
that's my hook. That's my hook, because I raised that because you were saying that you don't know anyone and no one knows you, but likely you'll have to pay your taxes. And I'm hoping that at that moment you would be met by someone from the Boston Tax Coalition, and the Tax Coalition folks could talk to you about how we might think about some other services around making sure that you get your earned income tax credit dealt with. We can talk to you about maybe a financial checkup. We could talk to you about maybe Boston Saves and a child savings account, some other things that could, in that moment of actually paying your taxes, that is an intervention moment. And so for actually thousands of folks across the city who are not connected otherwise, that can be a very productive and valuable way to get plugged into some other services and supports that you might not otherwise know about, particularly for folks who are really struggling to not only make ends meet, but to figure out what is their wealth building pathway, which has got to be, I feel like for you, that's a key question. Not only how are you getting your child care together and how are you balancing these two jobs, but how do you get yourself into a situation where that struggle can actually streamline a bit and really help your family to move forward.
Pablo.
The Raise Up Coalition is the coalition that brought you the $11 minimum wage roughly 3.5 years ago. They also brought you a sick time benefit, which is a ballot question 4 years ago. And so we've started to crack this nut. We've identified this same problem, and we've actually started to get out in the community and meet people where they're at, not just at their job sites through labor unions, but in their communities, at their places of worship. It is exactly why the coalition looks the way that it does, is because we are meeting folks where they're at to figure out how we can engage them to continue to build and grow our power. This morning, I had the chance to listen to some of the presentations that were talking about MCAS scores, talking about graduation, college graduation rates, all while the legislature is considering establishing a teen minimum wage. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because not different than this example of this 48-year-old single mother, teenagers are contributing to household budgets, and there's talk about discriminating against them. Teenagers are helping pay this rent that keeps rising that we're talking about. Teenagers are trying to save for college that has now become more and more unaffordable. And we're talking about paying them less? What, so that they have to go and work more hours and maybe go from full-time status to part-time status? I don't know how many folks were in that presentation that talked about, how much your graduation likelihood increases if you're a full-time student compared to a part-time student. Well, if I'm a teenager and my wage drops, I'm now going part-time. That just means that now my graduation rate just dropped, right? That's from the data of the presentation we heard today. And so I think if we're looking at this situation and addressing it, it is because it's an urgent concern, and I thank BARI for it. And the only thing that needs to happen for this to continue is for you, all the good people, to do nothing.
I'm wondering, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I do have a few more questions. I'm wondering, in terms of changing the narrative and in creating transformational thinking among leadership, does the city of Boston need a czar to handle these issues? Does the city of Boston need someone who's specifically focused on dealing with the inequality issues? Anyone?
I'll stand back. Go for it. Tell me.
I'll just jump in because
Tell us,
I'm that
tell
guy.
us.
I'm the jumping guy. I understand the desire sometimes for folks to go to a czar or a czar paradigm when you have a distributed set of things that need to be coordinated and need to be pulled together with some level of authority. However, we've seen it in federal policy around drugs and drug czars. We've seen it on all levels. The czars that we create don't tend to be empowered. They tend to be figureheads. They tend to be folks who are pulling attention and maybe motivation, but they can't mandate that things happen. One of the things that I was thinking about as a different way to approach this would be to say that, and this came up in a previous conversation around trust and trust building with the government, that people, residents, citizens, and certainly non-citizens, certainly look at their interactions with government as being, at best, sometimes an uneasy partnership, and at worst, openly hostile or conflictual. If it was possible to, instead of having a top-down czar paradigm, and instead have a sort of Sherpa or guide paradigm, right? A concierge paradigm where if people are trying to be empowered in their own economic mobility, could the city of Boston or a coalition of nonprofits put in place a set of folks who say, if you're trying to do something in your life, we will listen to you, we will help you, we will empower you. I think that may go, and to be sure, a fractured set of service providers already provide that in different and unique ways. But I like the idea of people saying, when I need to put gas in my car, I go to a gas station. When I need to turn the lights on, I pay the power company. When I need to change my economic mobility, I call the city of Boston's economic Sherpa program. I'm sorry, I don't have a better term for that. But grassroots empowerment is the other way I go.
I'm with Chris.
I would say that Sherpa could come in the form of a union.
I love that.
Because
I love what you do.
I think everybody in this room might agree that you don't get paid what you deserve. You get paid what you can negotiate, right?
Amen.
And when you get paid what you negotiate, that means if you don't have a union, you're left to your own negotiating abilities, right? And if we're talking a lot about low-wage workers, how much, what is their ability to negotiate something better than what they have? It's why we created Raise Up Massachusetts. We are used to bargaining for contracts as labor unions, but we've decided that we understand the intersectionality of everything we're talking about, that you don't have workers' rights you don't have worker justice without immigrant justice. You don't have immigrant justice without social justice or economic justice. And we've decided to take that and expand it. We are still negotiating and bargaining, only we're not doing it on a contract. The contract is at the ballot, and the negotiation is with the voters.
Right on.
You understand what I'm saying? And that's why I'm asking you all to get loud with your legislature and let them know what you think. And if there's nothing that can be stricken there and we head to the ballot, well, you'll have your voice heard there as well, right? But I would argue that, since World War II, the unions for the 40 years after World War II, the unions union membership was strong, and shared prosperity was achieved, right? With things like the New Deal, Social Security, right? The GI Bill. But then the 70s and the 80s came along, and unions started to become under attack, and union membership dropped. And what happened to productivity? It skyrocketed, right? And so if minimum wage would have kept up with CEO compensation, anybody want to guess what that rate would be, what a minimum wage would be? $120 had minimum wage kept up with CEO compensation, okay? But it's that diminishing power of workers and the attack on unions that I believe is a critical component to this debate. And so I would say we don't need a Sherpa, we just need to preserve the rights of organized workers to be able to negotiate a fair and safe contract.
Okay, I do have one more question. And that is this, and we'll just have one person answer it, and it can be anybody. This was talked about a little bit in terms of incremental progress. I worry that in these areas we're talking about today, that we need vast improvement, but that the progress will always be just incremental. And yet, the speed of societal, cultural, government changes that create and exacerbate these problems will always be faster than our incremental changes. So is that something that you worry about, or is that something we have to settle for, or is that okay?
I think for me, it goes back to your earlier point, Bob, about changing the narrative and changing our frame in terms of what we think economic success and even mobility looks like. So this is a critical moment for us to think about other kinds of models in terms of peer economy, shared networks, whether it's thinking about cooperatives. So moving from just thinking about, at least for me, because I think a lot about small businesses, what does it mean to move beyond sole proprietor models into something that's shared? If we think about land ownership, what does it mean to move beyond land ownership to land trust or land banking in different kinds of ways? So for me, I feel like the moment here for us is to say, if we want to think beyond incremental change or even open up that conversation, it means we have to really interrogate the ways that we think opportunity grows and manifests at this moment. And if we continue to think of, in some cases, very outmoded capital models or capitalistic models for change and growth, then we'll be stuck. But if there's an opportunity to kind of learn from Uber challenges there, learn from Airbnb, learn from kind of this different kind of sharing economy, what we can take, these are old ideas actually, and move beyond what are very limited kind of individualized understandings of opportunity. That's critical. And I know that at the city, that's something we're working on very much so.
Okay. Have I gone over? Are we taking questions from the audience, or are we?
We're at 5:05. Let me look at the real boss. So how about we do this? So first, let's thank the panel for a fantastic And so the good news is we have a reception down the hall with food and alcohol. And so if you want to talk to the panelists, ask them tough questions. I know there were a couple of hands up. Please do. But I'm going to take host prerogative and do just a very quick kind of comment before we close up for the day. I just want to say, again, thank you to this panel. Thank you to everyone here, the speakers, the attendees, for just a day of great conversations. I just want to say that first. So just take 30 seconds to pontificate, because this conference may or may not be the most important day of my year. I'm not sure if that's important, the same for any of you, but I wanted to reflect on something David said very early on in his list of kind of things you need to think about in this, and the idea that data is your best friend, or one of your best friends, as long as you use it and respond to it effectually. And what I love about this conference and this more general community that we have here and has been in these rooms today is that it's the integration of the people who are doing the data work with a lot of people who are not necessarily data people. They're not data scientists, but they understand data and they want to use that insight in actionable ways to help the city, as we've just discussed, to improve services, improve infrastructure, improve daily life for Bostonians. And I think that that's really exciting and really cutting edge. And I love this day because we get to see what's happened in the last year. And if I could just kind of chronicle a couple things that we noted today, right? We've got what I think is the first public agency to post a research agenda, and there are physical copies outside for people to take to really engage the research community, both private and academic, to think about, okay, what do we do? What do we solve? And how do we do it together? We've got a brand new citywide survey called Beacon that wants Boston communities to be heard. And it's a public resource for us all to invest in to try to get at the questions and answers that Boston needs to understand. We have the Boston Civic Media Consortium and the Engagement Lab building new resources for how do we think about collaboration between academics and nonprofits and communities to make them more equitable and to make them not only about knowledge for the academic side, but capacity building and knowledge building on the community side as well. We have numerous other initiatives with BU's initiative on cities continuing to grow and do great things. I hope that BARI is continuing to grow and do great things. Right? We have so many entities doing fantastic things, but doing it together and partnering and really expanding this world of data-driven research, policy, and practice in Boston, and that just makes me really excited. So with that, I want to thank the keynotes. I want to thank all of our speakers, our moderators. I want to thank our hosts, BU's Initiative on Cities, for doing this with us. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. And most importantly, I want to thank Sam and Patricia for making this day happen. None of this would have happened without their work. So if we could give them a round of applause. So with that, we have food and alcohol down the hall. Please, come.